The fifth episode of the ninth season started with Jerry feeling extremely nervous. It has been so long since he last had a job that just putting on his old suit scares him to death. For that, his daughter has something wonderful, a new species of worms that eat your worries away and make you feel amazing for a couple of hours. That is exactly what he needs. But Jerry flatly refuses to do drugs before breakfast. Even Morty had lost all hope and cannot believe his father actually has a job interview. Everyone had already accepted that he was going to be a moocher for the rest of his life. And those harsh words are exactly what motivates Jerry to immediately take one of the worms. The kids do not stick around to see the worm's effect. Instead, Rick sends Morty right away to the camp where he will spend the following week. Upon arrival, he bumps into his good friend Snowball, who is very happy to see him after so long. Snowball's new home is wonderful. The only thing that seems a bit bizarre is that they use humanoid creatures as pets, and some are truly hideous. Here they call them mups, and every single gifted dog living in this city has one of them. They are just pets, so physical appearance is not that important. On top of that, the rest of the gifted dogs treat Morty as if he were a pet, which is quite uncomfortable, especially when they get to the house, and he is almost devoured by genetically modified monkeys, a growing problem that Snowball hasn't been able to handle. Back with Jerry, the worms have reached 10%, and he is extremely relaxed during the interview. However, the fact is that he wrote on his resume that he has traveled between dimensions, and this sounds highly unbelievable to the interviewer. Nevertheless, after a while, everything takes a much more promising turn, and the interviewer invites him to a dinner with a major client. If Jerry manages to impress him as much as he did the interviewer, the job will be his. The confidence and security the worm provided have been the key to this success. So, as soon as he gets back to his car, Jerry eats all the remaining ones he has just to guarantee a positive outcome for this dinner. But the truly alarming part happens when he returns home and ends up parking right in the middle of the front yard, prompting his family to go outside to see what is going on. There, Rick uses a scanner, which clearly shows that Jerry has at least 50 worms in his body, and they are not just in his brain, but are also devouring his vital organs. The problem is that Jerry was so filled with anxiety that the worms are multiplying inside his body instead of dying off like they are supposed to. Because of this, Rick has no idea what to do in this situation, and Jerry is completely unwilling to cooperate for the time being since his business dinner is extremely important to him. Back with Morty, he is witnessing something deeply disturbing. Snowball's race not only keeps the mups enslaved, but they have also used technology to genetically modify them. Their hideous appearance is actually the result of countless variations that they haven't been able to control. Without wasting any time, Morty returns to the mansion, grabs his things, and tells Snowball he has to leave because he forgot a major commitment. However, his friend knows he will just go back and tattle to Rick about what is happening here. So, the moment Morty gets into the car, a squad of soldiers surrounds him and tries to kill him, but the boy manages to slip away and escapes into the city's slums. This area is overrun by the strange breed of monkeys seen earlier, who end up kidnapping Morty and dragging him deep into the woods. Meanwhile, back with Rick, the family has decided to visit the worm supplier to ask what can be done in a case like this, when someone consumes way too many and they start eating their body away. At first, the shop looks completely normal, just a bunch of glass cages with strange creatures inside. Rick is curious about the properties of each one, but there is no time to waste. They have come to see Dulce Maria, the store owner, and the only person who might have the answer to the huge problem they are facing. Upon learning what is happening, Dulce Maria offers them money in exchange for Jerry. He has basically turned into a breeding farm, and they could make a fortune off him if they keep him alive until the worms finish him off. When they refuse to accept the offer, Dulce Maria calls her men, and a fierce conflict breaks out over who gets to keep Jerry. This is when Space Beth and Rick take charge of the situation, and the battle begins, during which Rick ends up using Dulce Maria as a human shield. Just like that, the only person with the answer they needed dies in a hail of lasers. Regular Beth doesn't hold back either. The guy attacking her gets distracted long enough for her to smash one of the glass cages, and the creature inside pounces on the thug, gouging his eyes out. But after finishing him off, the creature lunges at Beth. Luckily, a dagger comes flying in and saves her, finally ending the conflict, but revealing another much more urgent problem. Jerry has vanished from the shop. Jerry's trail leads them down into the subway, where they find a dead guy right in the middle of a train car, so Rick uses a scanner to tap into his brain and see the last thing the man witnessed. The footage shows Jerry looking way too relaxed, singing and dancing in the car. This means the worms are operating at an accelerated pace, and once they finish off his anxiety, they will start eating him from the inside out. Now, their only clue to his whereabouts is that dinner with the client. Back with Morty, the monkeys drag him to their village, where he meets their leader, someone who can actually communicate clearly, and to whom he tries to explain that he has absolutely nothing to do with what is happening. Alana, the leader of the monkeys, turns out to be a mupp who escaped after being torn from her mother's body to satisfy the desires of one of those dogs who think they are geniuses. But now, her fight is to liberate her siblings and completely shut down the factories that use and modify them at will. When Alana finds out that Morty comes from a world where humans occupy the place of the mupps, she truly believes he is a messiah who has come to solve all their problems and finally restore the freedom that was wrongfully stripped away from them. Unfortunately, a few seconds later, a helicopter appears, and one of the dogs unleashes a hail of bullets on the monkeys, who are just trying to hide and stay alive. Following the gunfire comes an entire unit of mechs with specific orders from Snowball to find Morty and sacrifice him for questioning their way of life and threatening their existence. Motivated by the presence of their messiah, the monkeys decide to attack with rocks and sticks, but they are no match for the weaponry. Alana herself ends up dying after being shot in the chest, but in her final moments, she begs Morty to fight for them and free them from this terrible yoke. Morty steps in using a spear and kills the general who shot her, making the rest of the monkeys realize they must follow him. Now, the boy has accepted responsibility for a war that isn't even his. The next thing Morty does is hijack one of the mechs and teach the monkeys how to operate them to level the playing field. In his next message to Snowball, he tells him that he will never forgive him for trying to assassinate him. Under Morty's leadership and with the new mechs, the monkeys manage to repel the attack and claim victory. But now they must organize something much more difficult: the siege on Snowball's house to finish him off and finally shatter the yoke that oppresses them. As for Jerry, he finally manages to make it to the restaurant, where his future boss is waiting for him, highly motivated for the dinner. However, the bizarre thing is that the worms can actually be seen moving rapidly right underneath his skin. This is the clear sign that the worms have reached 60%. At the start of the dinner, Jerry takes total control, tells the very important businessman exactly what needs to be done, and successfully convinces him to sign the contract. However, for it to become effective, they must travel to New York. The next thing we see is Jerry aboard a private jet, grabbing the steering wheels and flying the aircraft himself. Before getting up from the pilot's seat, Jerry uses a fire extinguisher to completely smash the console, condemning the plane to a crash. Yet as the cockpit fills with fire and the pilot decides to abandon them, he approaches his future boss's wife and helps her deliver her baby, maintaining that same relaxed attitude that makes everyone believe he is a superhero. Jerry wraps the baby in his jacket and hands him to his mother, who decides to name him Jerry in his honor, leaving everyone thrilled with everything he has done. Unfortunately, the plane ends up plunging downward just seconds later, and it remains unknown whether they survived. Meanwhile, the cloud of smoke created by the plane ends up transitions us back to Morty, who is at the forefront of the offensive, where they have managed to successfully penetrate Snowball's mansion. The only problem is that there are more dogs than they can handle, and they are losing ground, so Morty comes up with the idea to attack the genetics labs, where the mupps are held prisoner, and free them so they can join the resistance. However, the mupps have been modified so many times that their brains are literally mush, meaning they end up using the weapons against each other and killing themselves. Thus, this part of the plan turns out to be a complete waste of time. Before going down, Morty decides to head straight for the mansion and smash through the walls, accompanied by the monkeys armed with spears and rocks. The downside is that in just a matter of moments, everyone ends up killed, but Morty manages to reach Snowball, who is waiting for him with a new mech, far more powerful than his own, for a final showdown. Snowball's attack is so powerful that it slams Morty to the ground, and Morty screams that they are no longer friends, not after he tried to kill him. This is when Snowball tells him that if they were truly friends, he wouldn't be disgusted by his world or what they are doing, since humans do the exact same thing in theirs, reminding him of how they treat dogs back on Earth. Snowball demands that he admit he is racist. If this were his planet, he wouldn't care one bit about what they are doing to the mupps. But when Morty refuses to admit that he is just as cruel, Snowball completely loses his patience and begins to choke him out. With the mechs partially destroyed, the fight seems to be reaching its climax when Morty simply admits that he only came to see his dog, whom he missed deeply. Not a cruel dictator who enslaved an entire race just to feel like he owned something. But now that he has decided to behave like a bad dog, then it is time to smack him with a newspaper. Maybe that way he will understand that what he did is wrong. However, Snowball makes it clear that he hasn't belonged to him for a very long time. He is no longer just a regular dog and won't act the way he did before being cursed with intelligence. If that is what he is looking for, then he should have found a replacement back on Earth because he won't find it here. In one final strike, Morty manages to grab Snowball by the neck. Without mechs or weaponry, he is just as defenseless as he used to be on Earth. So he lifts him up into the air and orders everyone to freeze, or their emperor dies. Now, this has turned from an all-out battle into a high-stakes hostage situation, and Morty is in total control. But that doesn't last long for him. The monkeys are enjoying the battle way too much, and if Morty isn't willing to stay behind and lead them, then the brutal war carries on, and the disaster continues. The level of destruction is so massive that at this rate none of them will survive, and the entire mansion begins to shake violently from the gunfire. So Snowball screams at him to run to the panic room immediately, or they will both perish. Using his cute, furry paw, Snowball unlocks access to the room. But before we can see what's inside, we cut back to Jerry, who emerges from the burning plane, cradling the newborn baby in his hands. In that moment, he delivers the greatest slogan ever heard in history and tells the wealthy old man that he will lead his company to glory, prompting the billionaire to hand over everything he owns. Right then, we see that the worms have reached 99% capacity. Jerry has led them to an old water tower where he tells everyone to strip down and swim with him. But once everyone is in their birthday suit, the worms pour from his mouth like a waterfall, and the businessmen start eating them in worship of their leader. A few moments later, Rick pulls up in a flying ship alongside his daughters, who can't believe what they are witnessing, but they must act fast. With that amount of worms, they will devour Jerry's body in no time, leaving nothing behind to punish for his actions later. Using the scanner, Rick discovers that the entirety of his body is made up of the worms. There is not a single fiber of his being that isn't covered by those things right now, so they must do something immediately. But the businessmen tell them that Jerry is perfect and will be the great leader of the company. When Beth hears this, she starts getting really worried. It has been so long since Jerry has done anything productive that the mere thought of him returning to the competitive corporate world makes her highly anxious, and the worms seem to detect that, starting to migrate directly toward her, abandoning Jerry's body completely. And at that exact moment, Rick uses his robotic arm to pull everyone out of there, but the worms plan to follow Beth, their new food source. So Rick has no choice but to throw a special grenade, creating a sort of giant bubble that surrounds the whole water tower and traps the worms, at least for the time being. That gives them just enough seconds to escape in the ship and get everyone away from there. From a distance, they can see the worms multiplying at an extremely rapid pace, but the special bubble is able to hold them in. Once the situation is under control, the businessmen offer to buy the worms. It has been a long time since they felt that way, and those things are a goldmine. So Rick agrees to make the deal only if they include Jerry, so he can get his commission, securing him a good job after saving everyone's life in a very heroic manner. Even though Jerry came close to killing them all on more than one occasion, the businessmen accept the deal, wrapping up the night for them. However, for Morty, the trouble is just getting started. His intense battle with Snowball has taken a back seat. Now they are just a boy and his dog trying to survive a war, hiding out in a playroom with a few bags of food and cans of tuna. This is where Snowball truly wonders if what he did was wrong. He just wanted to replicate the feeling of belonging that they have back on Earth. Life doesn't feel the same without pets, and he only wanted some company. Morty has no clue how lonely it gets when you are the absolute emperor of an entire planet. Morty realizes that maybe he went a bit too far with his prejudices, and Snowball sincerely apologizes for trying to kill him. But that doesn't change the fact that the mansion is shaking violently, and they could soon end up buried under the rubble. A few seconds later, the door opens, revealing that the capsule held up pretty well against the surrounding destruction. But as far as their eyes can see, there is nothing but death and devastation. Absolutely nothing is left of the house, only debris and the lifeless bodies of those who weren't as lucky as they were. Suddenly, a portal pops open, and Rick appears with a big smile to take him back home. But upon noticing the destruction, he is ready to put an end to all of it, though not by using violence. It turns out he has a massive supply of the worms in his trunk, so he begins handing them out to everyone who is still alive. One by one, the dogs and the monkeys readily accept the worms and completely forget what they were even fighting about, focusing instead on living a relaxed life and rebuilding what they lost. But the biggest shock Morty gets since the war started is finding out his father actually got a good job, leaving the entire family completely stunned. In a final scene, we see Jerry in his new office, but there is no trace left of the confident guy his higher-ups saw, so he will have to fake it for as long as this farce of being a provider for the family lasts. Bringing us to the great end of the episode.